would like to welcome Mr. Jon Wesick, noted author, international writer, and a poet of some significance. Also, short story writer and storyteller par excellence. Mr. Jon Wesick, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Richard. Nice to be here.
An honor to have you. I've always enjoyed not only your humor, but also your science background. I have strong science sympathies myself and has spent a little time in the fields of playing in the field of science. But first things first. Jon, I always like to start off asking, when do you remember your earliest writing when you just wrote for fun?
Well, some when I was a kid, I always read a lot. My dad, he bought thrillers and, so I thought I was like a 9-year-old kid reading all the James Bond books, and I was always reading science fiction and things like that. When it comes to poetry, the kind of poetry that they taught in school, the formal stuff, always seemed very stilted to me, but I always enjoyed things like a Bob Dylan lyric and so on. So, I first started writing really around 1997. I had wrist injuries from too much keyboard, and I could go to my martial arts class, and after about 15 minutes, my arms were just dead, and I'd just stand around. And I would go to work, and I'd type on the keyboard, and after about 15 minutes, my arms were just dead. And I even had one of those foot mouses, where you could the left one you can left and right click, and the right one you can move the cursor around. But after
Wow.
doing that a little while, my ankle started hurting, and about that time. I started writing poetry to fill in the gaps. And this was in San Diego, where there was a great poetry community. And I started going to open readings. Chris Van Noy and Lizzie Wan were the two sort of big poets there. And I immediately took to Chris Van Noy. He had some very surreal stuff that I liked quite a lot. Almost wanted to write like him, but of course, you can't write like anybody else. But Chris was actually very, very welcoming, and even I'm just some guy who kind of just showed up and said, like, well, no, I was a colleague. I was, one of the group, and that's kind of how it went. And I was over in San Diego for 23 years or so, and I kind of knew everybody in the poetry community then. And I ran a poetry reading for about 8 years out of an ice cream parlor called the Gelato Poetry Series, and it was the best damn ice cream parlor based poetry reading in the West Coast, if not in the world.
Very good, very good. You'd mentioned the Bond series and this science fiction. What were some of the early authors that spoke to you?
Robert Heinlein, I just loved Robert Heinlein when it came to science fiction. Somehow that was bam, that guy was just really had to read other stuff, and this is maybe 10 years old or something like that. Oh, it's the school study hall time. We're in the library, read a book, and I pick up one. Oh, this is really great. What is it? Oh, Robert Heinlein. And of course, A Stranger in a Strange Land was the
Rock.
landmark piece of fiction. Yeah, exactly. Philip K. Dick later on, I ended up loving him, ended up reading everything that he wrote. I liked the fact that, his endings were not happy endings, but maybe the characters were a little bit better off than they started from. When I started writing poetry, everything Bukowski, every Bukowski book I think I still have, but I can remember here I am unemployed because my hands are wrecked, and sitting here, reading Bukowski at maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, drinking green tea and writing poems myself. And the thing about Bukowski is, hey, all this stuff that other people are doing, that doesn't matter. It's, that's not your life. This is, live your life, not other people's lives. And that resonated with me. Although I probably wouldn't like him in person. I probably wouldn't want to hang out with him. But then again, I read everything that he wrote. So,
There's a one of the things that writers often talk about is, you know, there's writing for recreation, and then there's that kind of shift to the center of balance, where you really start to think of yourself as a writer. When do you have that sense? When did it come to you? When did you really feel that writing is important to you?
um, again, in again in the late '90s when I first started, and to some extent maybe I always feel like a pretender anyway. It's the imposter syndrome. Yeah, okay, sure. Just I'm playing this big joke on everybody, as sooner or later they're going to find out, and well, and there's no there's no reassurance that you're ever going to get. There's nobody's ever going to tell you, by God, you've really made it. You are really a writer right now. No matter how many books you write, no matter how many publications you get, you know, and there's nobody's going to tell you that it's good. How are you going to tell you if something that you write is good? This is I kind of like this. I think it's good, but there's no objective feedback that you're going to get that's going to say, yeah, by golly, you are a real writer right now. You really belong to the club.
Well, obviously, if you led a poetry group, you're, familiar with the terrain of, coaxing the reluctant or encouraging the tremulous, as well as trimming down those that overshare. Uh, all of those different parts of it. I was wondering, we've seen this blossoming since the COVID era of online poetry. Has there been anything that you've experienced in the online poetry that surprised you? That's categorically different than what was happening in real space?
Just just being able to hear voices from all over the world. Um, you know, hey, you want to go to a poetry reading in Singapore? Okay, fine. You want to go to one in India? Okay, fine. You want to go to one in France? Okay, hey, look, here's a guy from Africa reading a poem. Wow, okay. It's not just your town, it's not just the local coffee shop. Uh, and so you get to hear a lot more voices. I think that's the big plus of the Zoom era.
One of the other things that I always like to ask is there's a spectrum of opinion that starts with you got to write every day, you got to write and polish your craft, whether or not there's inspiration. And the other extreme pole is you only write when there's inspiration. Where do you fall on that gradient?
Oh, somewhere in the middle. I'm somewhere in the middle. I uh, keep a spreadsheet of ideas. I have a weird idea. I put it in the spreadsheet. And I can always go back. It might be an idea, it might be a phrase, it might be a title for a work. I can always go back and mine that stuff. And, sometimes, my God, here are these great phrases. I don't know what I have to do with them. Well, let's take all of them, we'll put them together, and it'll make kind of a sense. It'll be kind of a nonsense poem, but it actually turns out to be kind of cool. So I do that sometimes. I wouldn't say that I'm the guy who writes every day. You know, I I kind of go in spurts. I get an idea and I get very obsessive about it. What's the advice that I heard? You don't have to write every day, but don't make the gap so long that you never come back to it.
Another one of the questions I like to ask is are there topics that you find yourself returning to on a regular basis?
Um, yes, I think much of the topics Well, first of all, one of the topics, of course, is travel, poems of place. Here's a book called The Foreigner, Wherever I Go, a book of poems about travel that were just from, I don't know, 2 decades worth of vacations. Write about that. Well, what do I write about? I write about my life, I guess, and I think much of what I write about is, hey, all the things I hear on the news and all the talking heads, everything they're talking about, that's not my experience. My experience is this, you know, and uh, you could call some of them men's issues, I suppose. I write about politics some, although, uh, you know, I'm really less likely to write about politics now. I think we're kind of fed up with politics, and people need to laugh a little bit more and touch some sort of basic common humanity. Recently, I've been writing a lot of short stories that have been, I guess, experimental. I hear a lot of, of these videos about how you should write a short story. And, here's the structure that you have to use. And, there has to be conflict. And, the hero has to do this. And suddenly near the conflict, they have a change and grow and go back and win. And then there's a resolution and all that kind of stuff. And that works, but it's been overdone, and I find it really boring. And I find many of the movies and TV shows and books that I read are really boring. And so, for the last maybe 5 years or so, I've been trying to write other things. I've been trying to write experimental fiction that doesn't work like that. I've got a collection called Anti-Stories, and there's a whole artist statement about anti-stories and why I think all that stuff is wrong, where I just try to do experimental fiction and do things that are different. Here's a guy who's the narrator who isn't the main character, and while the CIA agent is going off to Baghdad, he's stuck in an office, doing data. A lot of things are parodies. The Chosen One is a trope, so I did a parody of The Chosen One where, he's a guy goes to sell shoes. He's the chosen one to be a shoe seller. Science fiction stories. Oh, wait a second, there's no science in here. So I have a parody called As the Science Turns, where it's a soap opera, and it's there's no science in it. It's all, oh, okay, we're going to the lab, great, and here's the woman's in love with Mr. McDreamy, and so on and so forth. Another one recently that I did is called Sledgehammer Ex Machina, and this this guy Brandon Sanderson is a fantasy writer, and I've never really read his books, but he has some videos that have good stuff on writing, and he was talking about bad writing advice, and somebody used the term deus ex wrench about authors who throw in arbitrary conflict because that's what fiction is supposed to be about. And so I did a parody Sledgehammer Ex Machina where, oh, here's the FBI and they're searching for the missing nuclear material, but every damn stupid thing that could go wrong it goes wrong in the agent's life, just making fun of that. Another thing that I write about, I've been doing a lot of noir stories. Most of them are parodies, but I took Jack Grapes's method writing classes online, and he's like one of the grand old men of Southern California writing. He used to have the On the Bus magazine, if you remember that. And one of the techniques he has is called the image moment, where you have a short action and another short action, and between this short actions are descriptions of the scene or maybe the character's thoughts or the past or something like that. And that just works kind of naturally into a first person noir story. I think he got it from Raymond Chandler, actually. I think he must have gotten that from Raymond Chandler. But anyway, I wrote while I was in his class, I wrote sort of a parody short story about it's Chinatown set in ancient Greece essentially, and Tiamat is the private eye. Of course, Tiamat is like one of the gods of creation, one of the Babylonian gods of creation, and Tiamat's disgraced, and she is now just a private eye hired by Zeus because somebody's been killing Zeus's siblings, and it's of course it's Saturn who's been eating them and stuff like that. Yeah, that's some of the stuff that I've been writing. This has nothing to do with what we were talking about, but I'll say it anyway. Uh, so I started writing poetry, and then I figured, well, let's write a story. And I read a story, and the first one maybe never got published. But then I started writing stories, and I just was not getting them published. And I was trying to, doing all the stuff everybody tells you, oh, find the journal, buy journals, buy $100 worth of journals and read them to see is good, and or look at where the people who write the stories you publish their stuff. None of that was working. So I ended up looking at things like the poets market, and also there's like a novelist and short story writers market. And I ended up sitting down with them and pulling out every single stinking number I possibly could. Okay, what are the percentage of submissions that are accepted by this journal? What is their circulation? That's something that you could do back in the days of print, maybe not so much in the days of websites. How fast do they respond? And well, okay, let's go by the numbers. And I sent stories off by the numbers, and within 2 weeks, I'd had like 2 or 3 acceptances of short stories. By God, I think something's going on here. So, and I even said, well, let's have some fun. I broke up my submissions into the normal submissions and the submissions by the numbers. And for about 18 months, I kept track of them, see which got more acceptances and stuff like that. I did statistics like a hypothesis test to assure that by God this is really it. I ran Monte Carlo simulations out of Excel to simulate this various stuff, and so I even wrote a paper called Moneyball for Creative Writers. And I submitted it to a peer-reviewed journal called the Journal of Humanistic Mathematics. Didn't think anything of it. 3 years later, they come back to me and say, "Hey, we'd like to publish this paper." So I actually have a peer-reviewed paper on publishing poems and short stories.
Spoken like a scientist, sir. Very good. Very good.
Oh, it was a
Very
great project. I had a lot of fun.
good. Um, when One of the things that happens a lot of the time when a young poet or a novice poet, attends one of these soirees, they sometimes turn to more experienced voices and say, is this worthwhile? I mean, how important is it? Is poetry worth pursuing? What would you say to a young poet or a novice poet about the question of, is poetry relevant? Is it important? Is it worth pursuing?
Well, I believe it added years to my life. Whether it's important for you or not, I don't know. If you have something that you have to say, and I think you also need some life experience too, what are you in it for? Are you in it for the writing, or are you in it for the adulation? So I think if you're in it for the writing, it's worth doing. Um, you're not going to earn any money, and
Oh, say it
yeah,
ain't so.
yeah, say it ain't so. You're not going to earn any money, and by God, I've even gone there and said, well, maybe I should write novels to earn money, and no, I didn't earn any money with those either. Are you gonna be a rock star? I don't know. I mean, you might be, but then again, dealing with people is difficult, and having kind of having a public face, I think is, also kind of taxing sometimes.
Yeah, two-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
I found myself in a situation where, as you know, I write a lot of science poetry or science humor poetry, and I was working at an engineering firm doing CAD and 2D and 3D simulations. One of the engineers really liked my stuff, and he said, "Listen, would you mind if I submitted one of your pieces? Because you're writing, but you're not, you're not famous. You should be famous." I said, "Look, I don't write for fame. I write because I write. I have to
Yeah.
write. I don't have a choice." So one day he actually walks into my office with a letter from the Johnny Carson organization
Wow.
inviting me to give them a call. They read my stuff. They think it's amazing. They want to talk to me.
Wow.
So I thought, boy, talk about out of left field, right? So I give these guys a call right there in the engineering lab, and
Yeah.
they said, okay, look, here's the deal. We like your stuff. But what we'd like to do is have you, go out there and we'll throw words at you and you write a poem on the fly.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
those of us who know anything about poetry know, you
Yeah.
know, the rules of poetry are such that you could string any group of 50 words together
Yeah.
and it's a poem.
Yeah.
But the funny thing was it kind of grated on me. And
Yeah.
I said, I'm not a performing monkey. I'm a poet. And we write things that mean something. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, of course I could stand there and string, if it was rhymes, rhymes, or free
Yeah.
verse, free verse. But,
Yeah.
if you want me because of what I've written,
Yeah.
I would do what I wrote, not random shit. And they go,
Yeah.
well, that's the deal. You want to do what we say or not? And I said, no,
Yeah.
I'll pass.
Yeah. Well, there are those guys that, they have take a typewriter and they put a stand out in front of the subway station. Hey, I'll write you a poem, and they kind of do that. And there are different kind of people. The rappers who can just spit rhymes, just off the top of their heads. Some of them are very good. Some of them aren't. But I mean, those people who can do that, that's not really a talent that I have. What's the French term, l'esprit de l'escalier, the spirit of the stairs. It's you're at a party and you think of the perfect comeback, but you realize it too late as you're leaving the party. You're on the stairs. I should have said this. Yeah, that's more or less what I'm like.
Okay, next question. Do you think that narrative is important in poetry?
It depends. I mean, there's narrative poetry, and what's the other one? Imageries now, I forget the name, but you know, it all depends. If it's done well, I think it's good. Um, so yes, often I find that people write poems that maybe should be prose. A lot of times I go to reading critiques and, well, why is this? Why do you put line breaks in this? This should be a piece of prose. Um, Maybe not so much narrative. Well, sometimes narrative, but often more essays. People write the essays. And, well, look, why is this a poem? Why isn't this an essay? It reads like prose. Why are you doing this?
Okay. Last, what kind of reading do you turn to for fun, for amusement?
Uh, lately, lately I've been reading science fiction and mysteries. A lot of books about hitmen for some reason. I don't know. I'm reading a lot of books about hitmen, and maybe it's just because I like a character who just does it without a lot, does what they're going to do without moral qualms and things like that. Here's what this guy wants to do. They do it. Or you remember the Parker novels by any chance? I think it was Donald Westlake who wrote them. This guy's a professional thief. He does his job, right? And he doesn't worry, he doesn't tie himself up about the morality of everything that he's doing. And that's not to say that morality is bad, But I think that in a lot of the fiction that I read and watch, they make a big play out of the morality of something where, it's they make a conflict out of it where it really doesn't necessarily need to be. Somebody defends their life with deadly force, and they're all torn up about it. Well, I've never been there, but at least for fiction, I think if you're defending your life or somebody else's life, you get a free pass. Most of the time.
Okay, Len, last question before we get to the fun
This
part.
is the next. That was the last question. Was the last question. This is now the last
Well,
question.
I needed to revise and extend my remarks.
Okay.
The wombat, sir.
Yeah.
Could you give us the 2 minuter on the wombat?
Oh, well, yeah, they're cute, right? They're just cute.
Okay.
Um, so there was a movie in the 1970s, a Nicholas Roeg movie called Walkabout. I don't know if you saw it or not, but two teenagers from the city get abandoned in the Australian bush, and they meet an Aboriginal. I think David Gilpilly was the guy who played it, uh, who's on his walkabout. They have to wander around for, a month or something like that in the desert to show that they can take care of themselves. And so they're lost, and so they tag along with them. And there's one scene where the girl wakes up and there's this cute animal sitting behind her. Oh, it was a wombat. I said, oh, what was that? That was a wombat. That's really cute. And so when I went to Australia, I had to, see wombats, and so I went to the Sydney Zoo, but they're nocturnal, and there's a log, and maybe you could see the wombat's ass in the log. And I'm driving around, and it's like, oh well, there's a dead wombat by the side of the highway. Well, that doesn't quite count. I finally it was someplace west of someplace west of Melbourne. I just stopped at some sort of edible place, and there's Millie the Wombat. So, I got to say hi to Millie the Wombat. And this one was a second trip to Australia, Brisbane, and there's like a koala sanctuary. So you take a little boat up the river, and it stopped at the koala sanctuary. They had several wombats there, and so this was I managed, my camera broke, but I managed to get a couple of pictures of wombats before the camera broke. This is the common wombat, and there's also a hairy-nosed wombat. There's a northern and a southern hairy-nosed wombat. Their nose is a little bit more broad. And I think either the northern one or the southern one is endangered. I can't remember which now, but yeah, I just think they're cute. I don't know.
Are they marsupial?
Yeah, they are. They're marsupials. They're related to koalas, except they're a whole lot smarter. Koalas evidently aren't that smart. And by the way, koalas, they sound like gorillas.
Really?
If you're there, they go like that, and
Wow.
you wouldn't think so. They got big long claws and
Yeah,
teeth
yeah.
and stuff like that. And,
Move very slowly.
yeah, yeah. Well, they only eat eucalyptus leaves. The wombats, they eat grass, and you can't really have them as pets. What happens a lot of times in Australia is one will get hit by the side of the road, and the motorist will check the pouch and pull a joey out, and then they'll take them to like what they call a wildlife carer, and they'll raise the wombat, and it follows them around like a puppy or so. But then when they get to like adolescence, they can't really take care of them anymore, and they have to reintroduce them to the wild. They get I don't know, rambunctious or territorial or something like that. So they're not really pets.
Well, John, now's my favorite part. I want to invite you to bring out whatever you'd like to read for us,
Okay.
and feel free to take a longer time. I always try to remind people that we're not in a 3 minute or 5 minute constraint. You've got half an hour. Read whatever you'd like to read. Take as long as you'd like. No
Okay.
problem.
Well, Richard, I'm glad you asked that because I brought all the books that I wrote. Okay, hold on a second here. Let's just pull some up. Here's Ode to a Wombat. Friendly faced ambassador, little smiling bear, button eyes, tennis ball nose, clumsy civil engineer, too distracted by Chaco Tim Tam dreams to shore up collapsing burrows, always emerging from cave ins, disheveled, dusty, puzzled. Unconcerned that cousin Koala won the popular vote, Wombat takes life as it comes, munching grass, rolling in dust, turning on her back, stubby legs bent to nap in the early morning sun. And of course, this one is from the book of travel poems, A Foreigner Wherever I Go. Let's see. Okay, here's another one. New Zealand was probably the best example of an industrial power treating Aboriginal peoples with respect. And the treaty at Waitangi brought New Zealand into the British Empire. And a guy named George Busby negotiated with the Maoris for this to happen. In practice, it maybe didn't work out as well as people say, but you hold it in contrast with like Australia, where they called it terra nullius, which means land, empty land, land free for the taking. So New Zealand fared a little bit better than Australia did. So a little bit north of Auckland, we actually stopped at Waitangi, and this is a poem called Treaty House at Waitangi. Across a perfect lawn, a skeleton of stained wood supports the white A-frame. A carving of Coupe, the discoverer grins with paddle in hand from the gable over the doorway. He gazes at a white flagpole standing like a ship's mast on the promontory overlooking islands that float like greenstone canoes on the sapphire bay. I slip off my shoes. Inside socks glide over the smooth wooden floor. Fierce faces of Maori ancestors threaten with protruding tongues, glare with mother of pearl eyes from carved beams. So this is where the British and Maoris signed the treaty. Only it's not. In my rush to the 1940 Maori meeting hall, I passed the treaty house without a second glance. Humble like compromise, the boxy white structure looks like an office, not the birthplace of a nation. Humble, too, was the house's owner, James Busby, lacking George Armstrong Custer's halo of golden hair and thunder of Spencer repeating rifles. Busby negotiated with the Maori chiefs. No trail of tears, no wounded knee, no thunderous brass band for Busby, only courtrooms and bankruptcy. Nations do not honor heroes with no blood on their hands. Yeah, let's do another poem of place. So in Buenos Aires, during the dictatorship, the mothers of the disappeared would meet in the square in front of the Casa Rosa, which the pink house, which is like their White House, to hold up pictures, of their children who the junta had, tortured and murdered. To find out what happened to them. And there's still a Mothers of the Disappeared bookstore. And so, we went there in 2007, I think. So this is the Mothers of the Disappeared bookstore, Buenos Aires. The snapshots are unremarkable, save for clothing 30 years out of date. Some black and white, others color. These are the victims of the dirty war. The generals, now ghostly TV images, their faces gray as intestines, ordered deaths by the thousands. Ordinary people hustled into Ford Falcons, tortured, their bodies tossed from DC-3s into the Atlantic. But it's not that simple. Photos of Lenin, Castro, and Che Guevara hang on the bookstore's walls. I buy a Mothers of the Disappeared t-shirt for my mom and pray it doesn't become a prophecy in Bush's America. Outside, pounding drums, marchers with red flags. Do ghosts of Ford Falcons still cruise these streets? We wait on the sidewalk while tens of thousands passed. Muchas gentes, a shop owner says. I nod. The drums, boom, ba-boom, ba-boom, girls selling socialist newspapers, marchers with banners wide as the Avenida de Mayo. Lauren takes out her camera. The flash, rows of men with clubs bring up the rear, their faces disguised with bandanas or keffiyehs. We cross to Cafe Tortone, fine china, cloth napkins, waiters in tuxedos, photos of celebrities on mahogany walls. I drop a submarine-shaped chocolate in my cup of hot milk. Lauren sips coffee and says, "This is the best night of my life." Anyway, those were from Foreigner, Wherever I Go. The first poetry book I did was this one, Words of Power, Dances of Freedom. And it was kind of a best of from 1997 to 2015. My mom died about the time I turned 60, and I realized that, I'm not going to be around forever, so I might as well take all this stuff that I've been writing and push it out there because I don't want it thrown away when I die. So I'll read some poems from this one. Earth opens. You plunge into the pit of absurdity and clod uncaring obsidian walls in a futile attempt to break your fall. Who will help you now? Your lover stabs you in the heart with her IUD and then names you in a class action suit. Friends roll their eyes into their heads to gaze at the machismo Hollywood stamped on their craniums. Your father's advice falls asleep on the couch before the 10 o'clock news. Who will help you now? The old professor replays a taped lecture the psychiatrist doodles on a prescription pad while you pay him $200 an hour. The minister motions you into a line of followers, getting crosses cauterized into their minds. Who will help you now? The CEO talks competition and teamwork while stuffing broken promises into a deposit envelope. The general delivers a rousing speech and smiles to reveal severed limbs caught in the gaps between his teeth. The politician straps logic to a chair, beats it with a baseball bat, and says it's for the nation's good. Who will help you now? Teenage girls practice pleas for new clothes. A career woman makes love to her cell phone. She arches her back and closes her eyes when you pass. Touts your credit card offers from your mailbox. A piss-stained bum asks you for a quarter. Who will help you now? The Mexican waiter says, "How you doing, my friend?" Maybe that will be enough.
Powerful stuff, John.
Yeah, that was one where, I had this feeling, yeah, for a long time and finally figured out a way to say it, years and years. And okay, I can know how to say this now. Here's one called The Bodhisattva of Gridlock. Noble Ambudishakra perfected the art of patience over tens of thousands of lifetimes at the I-5805 merge. Despite SUVs the size of Mount McKinley blocking his view, blindsiders passing faster than the speed of sound in the right lane, and rubberneckers slowing traffic to the pace of maple syrup at absolute zero, Ambudi Chakra never laid on his horn or extended his middle finger. Thus, he severed the trailer hitch of past karma, and the passing lane of nirvana opened before him. What he thought was his rusty Yugo transformed into a sleek silver gray Audi TT. Ambudi Chakra settled into the leather bucket seat, depressed the clutch, and reached for the stick shift. In the nanosecond before stomping the accelerator, he thought of those left behind in traffic. Sentient beings commute to earn money for car payments and make car payments so they can commute. Truly, they are trapped on the wheel of suffering. Pity moved on Buddha Chakra's heart, and he pulled over into the breakdown lane. Let any sentient being trapped behind a slow-moving semi or prevented from merging into the exit lane call my name, and my compassion will become a wide road that smooths his path and steers him from danger. Just then, Indra parachuted from the Channel 10 traffic helicopter, placed his palms together, and said, "Well done, Ambudi Chakra, well done." A great concourse of gods, dragons, yakshas, gandharas, asuras, garudas, kinnaras, and maharagas, as well as thousands of bhikshus, bhikshunis, upasakas, and upasikas, all in their hybrid vehicles, assembled and touched their foreheads to Ambudi Chakra's feet. The Bodhisattva's mystic power transformed the line of light stretching to North County and back again into a rosary of precious rubies, each sliding through his fingers with the recitation of the sacred mantra Om Mani Padme Om. All beings present then realized their broken down vehicles were in fact lotuses in the pure land Sukhavati, where compassion has cleared all obstructions from the road to enlightenment. And of course, yeah, a lot of the,
Lovely mixing of metaphors, brother. Very, very nice.
yeah, all the things, the Garudas, Kinnaras, and stuff like that. They're all from Buddhist sutras and
Right.
whatnot. And this is the Ambudhi Chakra. I don't know if it's really right or not, but I tried to look up the Sanskrit for four wheel, and so Ambudhi Chakra, I believe, means four wheel. Although a
Ah,
real
ah.
Sanskrit speaker would probably, argue with me. The trouble with Russian writers. Chekhov brings a pistol to the dinner party and shows it square, blue steel and deadly, while waiters ladle out cherry soup. I knock my bowl over, staining the tablecloth like the aftermath of some gangland slaying. Even waltzing with Ludmila Ivanova cannot take my mind off Chekhov's piece. Violin, chamber orchestra, my hand on her side, her tender pink shoulders, the orange silk gown, while hollow point, jagged metal lurks in the gun. You can't relax with a Russian writer around. Once he introduces a pistol, it has to go off. But what about those other threats? Terrorists spooning anthrax into Valentine's Day cards, SS-19 missiles pointed at New York and Chicago, dirty bombs infiltrating the country in shipping containers like AIDS penetrating white blood cells, and those sick chickens in China waiting to infect us all. Ludmila's rosy fingers toy with my waistband, promising a future of friendship and love. But I know God's a Russian writer. I abandon her and stand by the punch bowl, the heavy oak table some cover, for when trouble goes down. This is called Dilettante Zen Poem. The real Zen students were sitting in full lotus before dawn, wearing their black robes and rakusu. I stayed up too late watching TV. Real Zen students don't have TVs. Eventually, I wake up, light a candle on the altar, and kneel on my meditation bench. A gasoline-powered edger begins its serenade, and a lawnmower joins in the chorus. By now, the real Zen students are constructing monastery buildings, working with the dying, or reaching out to the homeless. I drive to my wrong livelihood job where I'm harassed by my wrong livelihood boss. Real Zen students call this good training. I call it a pain. Real Zen students vow to return to this world of patience for countless lifetimes to save all beings. I wonder how I'll get through another day. I've given up trying to be a real Zen student. I think I'll become a dilettante instead. If you'd like to be one too, we meet at 7 most nights in the meditation hall. Okay, so let me read some. This is the shaman in the library. This is, my most recent
I
poetry.
really enjoy your wonderful combination of cynicism and spirituality. It's a delightful mix.
Yeah, well, there's this there's this kind of pretending to be something you're not, this kind of we're all nice and we're all nice and we're all mellow and it's not really my experience, you struggle with stuff, and even if you do meditation, you struggle with stuff, and you're still a real human being, not some sort of cardboard cutout. Anyway, okay, here's the title piece from Shaman in the Library. Actually, I had this weird idea for some sort of wildness, and I needed a calm place to put it. And so a guy named Tristan Monroe, who I worked with, said, "What about a library?" So, okay. So anyway, Shaman in the Library. Naked except for a loincloth, ritual scars, and streaks of red clay, he attends the staff meeting. Bowl haircut, back straight, face impassive. Why is he here? No one knows. Since the library opened, he's pushed a loaded book cart and replaced Suzanne Summers and Gwyneth Paltrow in the diet and exercise section. Trembling patrons pay late fees promptly when he stands by the circulation desk. A few parents complain their teenagers shadow him, chasing rumors of hallucinogenic ayahuasca vines hidden in the botany section. And after the singed carpet incident, management forbade cooking fires. No more fresh rabbit meat, only packets of microwave cassava. He pricks his fingertip at shift's end and fills out his timesheet with human blood. It's a good life. His employer provides health insurance and retirement plan. But when the wild parrots come to strip fruit from nearby trees, he remembers the land of his birth, his vision quest, fasting to the point of death, and how his spirit animal came to him. He remembers inhabiting the jaguar's body, its savage strength, and the power he gained, power to take life and heal. Free from culture and convention, he hunted at night the heart-pounding chase, the taste of wild boar's blood. And of course, the wild parrots, in San Diego, for some reason, as I walked to the train, sometime around September or so, all these green parrots would come and they'd all sit in this tree for about 2 days eating the fruit. Parrots aren't native to San Diego. I think they some pets got loose or something, and they bred and kind of took over. There's a movie, something about the wild parrots in San Francisco, too, a documentary, but I never watched that one.
I had a
Uh,
experience where I was asked to videotape Tibetan monks when they came to Miami,
Mhm.
and at the end was a satsang, and it was in a very very upscale neighborhood. And the gentleman whose house it was at, it was museum quality art in the whole place. He'd been a very very successful accountant for the U.S. Army in South Vietnam, and had a 20-foot tall Buddha statue in his front yard. So there was certain ironies about his
Yeah.
practice. Anyway, the monk comes in and he says, you know, in America you have a lot of things. Pause. I hope it
Yeah.
helps. And
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. It's a balance, you know. It's a balance between having enough stuff and. Let's see if I can find the one I was looking for
I
here.
really enjoy your work, John. It's absolutely beautiful, and very very amusing.
Yeah, I'm trying to find one here. Let's see the. You know, I was looking around and trying to see which one I could do. This is. Boy, man. Hmm. Well, all right. Well, who knows? Couldn't find that one I was looking for, but is what it is. The duplicity of objects. The sun broke its promise by snorting oxy and watching internet porn instead of showing up at dawn. The moon filed for divorce and took off toward the Oort cloud with an unemployed comet. We pinned our hopes on Jupiter, but all the $25 checks we sent failed to spark nuclear fusion's match in its hydrogen core. Corn, soybeans, and hard northern wheat walked off the job. Breakfast hung up a going out of business sign, but don't worry, lunch will remain open until the last golden retriever is gone. Lakes and rivers broke their promise by sharing dirty needles with lead, cadmium, and petrochemicals. But don't worry, school water fountains will stream vodka while supplies last. Gravity broke its promise by selling defense secrets to finance its gambling habit. The atmosphere said, I'm out of here. But don't worry. As you hover, gasping for breath, know that although faithless objects broke their promises to you, your nerves that carry pain will keep theirs. Um, Eulogy for the Unfriended. We gathered to mourn the loss of Alice stroking her brown and white St. Bernard, Barbara embracing her acoustic guitar, Cheryl, who tipsy on Chianti flirted with me at Don's going away dinner, Brad, who worked nonviolence into his martial arts when evicting drunks from a topless bar, Jeff, whose poems meander from sarcasm to irony and back, Jerry, the pot smoking Vietnam vet, always quick with a joke, and Rob, who volleyed batshit ideas with me on the improv stage. Holding cognitive dissonance in respect for non-conforming facts, I've paused over the unfriend button for years, but what do I say to Harriet, who wants me booted out of the country for not praying to her God? Scratch a profile picture, get a noxious gas of racist dog whistles and totalitarian sympathies. Praise for Joseph McCarthy's blacklist, beating protesters and banning the press from exposing politicians' deceit. Skepticism turns on science and medicine while leaving hype and spin unquestioned. Deadly lies infiltrate like a puppy with a suicide bomb. Measles and whooping cough back in style. Bound feet, lead makeup, whalebone corsets. Friendship wears a warning sign. Trust an electric fence.
Very nice, very nice.
Another love poem that didn't work. Come, love, be the antacid that soothes my burning heart, and lie with me on pumpkin spice strewn over my truck bed liner. Your feet are dainty as hybrid subcompacts, each leg slender as a 3.5-inch nitrous-ready drive shaft with chrome alloy yoke and solid body U-joints. Your navel a glazed donut, your breast round and firm as the tennis balls my Labrador retriever never tires of chasing. Your neck graceful as a Swedish floor lamp, your gaze hypnotic as the smartphone app that summons our ride share to paradise. I want to drink sweet Moscato from your cochineal lips, then sober myself in the dark roast Americano of your hair. My passion is a 2.9% APR credit card. It's chip and pin, unlocking the bounty of your desire. Okay,
Bravo,
well,
sir.
that poem didn't work.
Bravo, sir.
See, I have two collections of short stories so far. This is called The Alchemist's Grandson Changes His Name. This is the book of serious short stories. This is called Arugula. This is the book of more funny short stories.
You've got
And I
time
don't
for
know.
about one more, brother.
Time for one more. Okay, well, let's see. Okay, there we go. This is called Pioneer Spirit. Uh, I was feeling kind of upset. I was, flying back and forth to the East Coast from San Diego, and like a dozen times I got the middle seat. So I ended up writing this poem. Feeling giddy, I was up before the cock crowed. Pa said a boy like me weren't likely to make such a journey, except for once in his lifetime. 'Twas true, I was about to see sights my schoolmates hadn't. A great continent with its wide rivers, bountiful plains, and gigantic mountains. My good mood weren't to last, though. Soon as we got to the check-in line, an arrow struck in Pa's laptop. Indians! We circled our roll-on bags right there in the departure suite and returned fire till we drove 'em off. Sure was mighty glad we brought along our Winchester repeating rifles. Darn shame them TSA agent confiscated 'em at security. Had to build a campfire in the departure lounge to keep the cougars and coyotes away. Ma fried up some Johnny cakes. Pa set out some snares and came back with a poppy seed bagel and cream cheese. About an hour into the flight, Ma started to feel right poorly. Pa ain't no doctor, but he's seen enough sick folks to know a case of swamp fever. We tried to make Ma comfortable with the tiny pillows and airline blankets and all, but when we was over Death Valley, she started begging for water. Only we didn't have no credit cards to buy no beverages or boxed lunches. Hold on, Ma. Pa held her hand. I tried to cool her brow with a bandana soaked in urine, but it weren't no good. We asked if there was a preacher on board, but there weren't none, so Pa said a few words from the good book afore we laid Ma's body to rest in the aft galley. That flight seemed like it would to last forever with them tiny seats, Adam Sandler movies and all. By the time we was over Ohio, I'd have rather wrestle a pack of rabid possums in my long johns than sit through another one. When we made our final approach, we bowed our heads and Pa thanked the Almighty. But our trials weren't over. Pa killed a rattlesnake over by the baggage claim, and a masked man with a 6-shooter tried to rob us at the Wolfgang Puck's Pizza. If it weren't for Pa's thinking fast and putting back that Caesar salad, we wouldn't have made it out of there. We rounded up a bunch of drovers to carry our bags, but one of the mules got washed away in a torrent from a busted water main on the way to the hotel courtesy van. I'll never forget my first look at our new home, the Marriott Hotel. It had the prettiest red roof, but them big picture windows made us sitting ducks if the Indians decided to attack. Luckily for us, there were plenty of trees we could cut down to build a proper defense. Papa said we could do that on the morrow, afore planting sorghum in the divider in the parking lot. For now, all we wanted to do was set out our bedrolls and watch HBO.
Well, I always try to offer my poet guests since I've asked him to read so many pieces and Turnabout's Fair Play, your poem about the plane trip reminded me of one, a vintage one of mine that goes back to the Bush era, but the same fervent spirit of Americana moves many today. And this is a piece I call Homeland Defense. Between the kings of Saudi oil, who Shell and Exxon dare not despoil, and those of Wall Street's fiscal toil, where betting against the working man guarantees a stock's demand, and Desert Prince with generous eye holds courts intense, where gas station cards shall pay the rent. Does the oily hand of GH show old CIA man still in control? Pass the ID cards, but not a fakin', this way from true American icon shaken. Your face will now be pre-recorded and all your flights will now be boarded. Arm the pilots, the stewardess too, next to the pillow and the barf bag fun. All passengers now will be given guns. Ah, for a shootout in the airy blue, what a day can do. I pictured the Stewie, tray in her hand, confronted by the wanted man, toss the tray into his face, spins on her arm and kicks him trace. He rolls across the cart to a Boy Scout troop who truss him up and steal his boots. His arms behind his back now tied, they bounce him over to the choir side, who pummel, pillage, then retire. But all those who were watching were inspired. Then a group of Civitan asked for a few fingers from his hand, and a brownie troop wants his fishy beard. You should have heard the things I heard. Then an old monk Jesuit gave him twice a goodly kick, and the secretary gets him with her bick. Though the pilot and co-pilot were vying for priority, they submit their decision to the vote of the majority. Some wanted to toss him right out the door, but a cloister of nuns still wanted some fun. They dragged him back to the airplane's tail, and a rugby team ran him back to the gale. Up to the galley where they banged his head 2 or 3 times on the oven's lid, and a group of congressional aides in first class pulled every hair from out of his ass. A covey of comedians dove right in with a left and a right to his nose and his chin. And a group of traders down from Duluth pushed him and mashed him into the roof. Some ceiling ties in the overhead bin broke when they tried to stuff him in. But let this be remembered and never forget, don't ever wait till your library book's late.
Yeah, that one actually reminds me. What was it? The guy, the underwear bomber.
Right,
You know,
right, right.
and quite honestly, maybe I'm not the pacifist I should be, but if that guy were on my plane, every time I walked by the aisle and they caught him, I would punch him in the face a couple times.
Well, I just thought I would extrapolate
Yeah,
as one does, those of
yeah,
us
yeah, yeah,
who poets of excess.
yeah.
Sir, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to leave us with one final one?
One final one. Oh my goodness. You know what? Let's see if I can find a. Let's
Something
see if I
like an
can.
encore.
See if I can
Take your
see if I
time.
can find one for you here. Hold on a second.
Sure.
See, okay, this is the alchemist's grandson. Okay, this is the alchemist's grandson. Changes his name, and this is the title poem. After graduation, Herb Gordon drove his primer gray AMC Gremlin west to the San Fernando Valley, where he landed a job with a small defense contractor. Each day at work, Herb hunched over a computer terminal and modeled nuclear war scenarios. The monitor glowed with cool green numbers enumerating the logic of mutual assured destruction. Herb's fingers played the keyboard like an organ. He composed subroutines that took the size and location of nuclear bursts and perfected the number of deaths from overpressure burns and radiation sickness. Once the calculations completed, Herb's code spit out a glossy map with colorful contours showing the number of fatalities. At first, Herb felt uneasy about his job, but he repeated the mantra that gave him peace. By informing the nation's military leaders of nuclear war's true human cost, my calculations make it less likely. Soon the bombs and missiles seemed far away from Herb's air-conditioned office. Surrounded by its pale green walls, Herb strove to produce the most accurate predictions he could. One afternoon, Ron Martin, Herb's supervisor, asked to see him. Ron, dressed in a white shirt with red striped tie, the typical uniform of an engineer of the day. "There's a problem with your calculations, Herb," Ron said. "The casualties are too high. The administration is asking Congress for a major increase in defense spending to pay for the winnable nuclear war initiative. Your predictions give their critics ammunition. That could affect our funding." "But these are the best calculations we've done. I've added factors that you ignored in previous versions: radioactive contamination from ground bursts, disruption of fire and ambulance service, and so forth." I know, but we've got to get these numbers down. Go back and take a look at your assumptions. What if you change the direction of the winds so they blow radioactivity away from cities? The time of day could be important. Say the workers had gone home for the night. Factoring in some shielding from hills and buildings could reduce death from blast and burns. How long do you think it would take to make these modifications? Herb paused before answering. "I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the code." "Okay, let me know by tomorrow afternoon." As Herb turned to leave, Ron added, "You know, Herb, I've been very impressed with the job you've done so far. There'll be a nice bonus for you at the end of the year." The green cursor on Herb's computer terminal blinked on and off, inviting him to use one of mankind's most magnificent electronic brains, but all Herb could do was stare. After work, he drove home to his empty one-bedroom apartment and searched the want ads in physics a day. Nothing looked promising. Physics glory days were over. Only a select few graduates could hope for a university job. The academic community had greeted the results of Herb's 7 years in graduate school, 7 years of living on coffee, nerves, and instant ramen, with a polite yawn. This had convinced Herb to search for work in industry, hence his move to LA. Herb went to bed and thrashed with the covers until 3 a.m. When he finally slept, troubling dreams visited him. His sleeping mind rehashed black and white newsreel footage of Japanese doctors in gauze masks using chopsticks to place dressings on the burned, mottled skin of nuclear bomb victims. Herb dragged himself to work and struggled through the morning. He went out to lunch and stopped at a pink-walled Mexican restaurant on Sepulveda Boulevard. Herb placed his order and stood waiting while electric fans blew hot air in from outside. Occasionally, a radio announcer would interrupt the salsa music that blared from the loudspeakers with a commercial in Spanish. When the woman behind the counter called Herb's number, he exchanged his receipt for his fajitas on a red plastic tray. Herb sat at a formica table. The white plastic knife he used to cut the burned flesh carved grooves in the styrofoam plate. He lifted a forkful of meat to his mouth and chewed slowly. It tasted of ashes. His stomach rebelled. Herb pushed the plate away. There had to be some way out of this predicament. What would he do if he left his job? Nobody else would hire him. 11 years in college studying physics had come to nothing. He listened to the salsa music playing in the background. Herb pushed back his chair, stood, and began to move his hips to the Afro-Cuban rhythm blaring from the loudspeaker. The brown-skinned women who sat at the other tables and wore identical white cotton dresses stared at him, but Herb was beyond caring. He placed his feet to the staccato rhythm of the bass and began to sing along with the chorus in badly pronounced Spanish. Then the voice of the lead singer broke through, taking Herb's spirit higher. Herb saw options and possibilities he'd never dreamed of. Herb Gordon never returned to his job. To make sure his former employer never found him, he changed his name to something looser, more Latin. Now Akimbo Bustamante works on a roofing crew. Most people consider his career a failure, but at night when he dances, the whole world dances with him.
Excellent. Excellent, sir. Excellent. I had a colleague at an architectural firm I was working at who said to me one day, we were talking about the Vietnam War and its excesses. And he said, you know, Rick, I was a really successful student. I was in ROTC at Columbia University, straight A student. And he
Yeah,
said, one day I'm doing this equation. How many soldiers could I get across a nuclear bombed area?
yeah,
And how many would be left? How many would die of radiation? And he said, it suddenly struck him that these were human beings.
yeah.
He got up and walked away. Powerful, powerful story, John. Powerful.
Yeah, of course, the book Philip Glasstone, The Effects of Nuclear Weapons, is kind of the textbook for those nuclear effects, and there's a like a little calculator in the back of it, like a little analog calculator, like a slide rule. It's like a circular thing where you dial in the size of the nuclear blast, and whether it's an air burst or a ground burst, and it'll tell like how many casualties from blasts and burn and stuff like that to predict.
Have you seen Ellsberg's? I think it was his last book about his work before he did the Pentagon Papers.
Yeah,
He was tasked with discovering. They all, there was a paper plan how nuclear weapons are controlled, but he was tasked to find out exactly what were the actual real
yeah,
world concerns
yeah,
and controls on nuclear weapons. And he said literally it scared him to death.
yeah,
And that as he and his colleagues finished their study, they went to a theater to see a film to kind of relax.
yeah.
And they went to see How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the
Oh, yeah,
Bomb.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And he said it turned out that one of the consultants on that was a British colleague of theirs who had
Yeah.
been studying nuclear war.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think the controls are better now than in the '60s. I don't know, those guys at Sandia spent a lot of work on making sure these things don't go off by accident. I think there's an old documentary on YouTube about that. It's kind of interesting, couple hours worth, and their phrase is like always never. It'll always work when you want it to. It'll never work when you don't. That's what they're shooting for. And there's a lot of technical stuff that they did.
Well, John, thank you so much for sharing your work with us and talking. I can't thank you enough. It's been really wonderful getting to know you a little bit more.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for sharing your work.
Well, thanks, Richard. Thanks for inviting me.
Have a good day, brother.
Okay, take care.
Bye bye.